Good evening. Welcome to the 21st edition to the Political Mike podcast. It has been a little while since this platform has been live, and so much has happened and transpired since the last time this platform was live. But I'm happy to have the panel that I have now to help me dive into um, a lot that's been going on between now and the immediate end of election night. So go ahead. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce this very distinguished and accomplished and outstanding panel tonight. I'm going to start off with Mr. Nate Honore. Nathan is a law student at Quinnipiac University School of Law. He has a passion for human rights and for diplomacy. Next, I'm going to introduce Miss Ariana Patton. Ariana Patton is a rising 2L at Thurgood Marshall. She's a current 2L at Thurgood Marshall School of Law. She's a native of Ellenwood, Georgia. She began her political journey during her senior year of high school, where she had the opportunity to intern for the late office of Congressman John Lewis. Now, after interning for John Lewis, she remained in the political field by receiving her Bachelor's of Arts degree in political science from Spelman College and obtaining internships with the Georgia Legislative Black Caucus, Planned Parenthood Public Policy Division, Coca-Cola, Toyota Government Affairs, and L'Oreal USA. Ariana currently has a political Instagram account that I would encourage you all to follow at the Black Girl Politico that educates her followers on the political issues of the day. Ariana hopes to one day become a member of Congress. And on a personal note, I've seen Ariana up close and personal. She's very knowledgeable in terms of what's going on in the political atmosphere. And so I'm so excited to have her help me bring back the political mic after a short hiatus. Ariana, welcome back. And I'm going to now introduce Professor Fred Cook, whose exam I had just taken this week. Frederick Douglass Cook Jr. was born and raised in the District of Columbia. He attended a District of Columbia public school system and graduated from McKinley Technical High School in 1965. After high school, Mr. Cook enrolled at Howard University and graduated in 1969 with a degree in psychology and a commission as a second lieutenant in the United States Air Force. Mr. Cook deferred some of his Air Force service and enrolled at the Howard University School of Law, where he was a managing editor of the Howard Law Journal and chairman of the National Conference of Law Reviews for the 1971 to 72 school year. He graduated with honors from the law school in 1972. Upon graduation, he served as the law clerk for the Honorable George W. Draper II, an associate judge of the Superior Court for the District of Columbia. In 1973, he was appointed a captain in the Judge Advocate General's Department of the U.S. Air Force and served 4 years in that capacity. In 77, he returned to the district and began a law practice with a large corporate law firm specializing in telecommunications, higher education, entertainment, and corporate law. He became a partner in that law firm in 1982. In 87, he was appointed by Mayor Marion Barry to serve as the corporate counsel at the District of Columbia. He has been an adjunct professor, faculty member since 1992 of Howard University School of Law. He is one of the founding members of the Black Entertainment and Sports Lawyers Association, a member of the Washington Bar Association Hall of Fame, and a Washingtonian Magazine Top Lawyer awardee. He also serves on several boards of not-for-profit organizations. He is a member of the Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated, which he repeatedly makes known every time we have class. Professor, it's good to have you back on. I'm going to go ahead and introduce a good friend of mine, Chris Johnson. Chris Johnson is a proud native of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He's an alumnus of Oakland University in Huntsville, Alabama, where he earned a Bachelor's of Arts degree in pre-law with a concentration in political science. Christopher currently serves as the District Office Chief of Staff for Pennsylvania State Representative Joanna McClinton. Previously, he served as a Capitol Hill intern with the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation in Washington, D.C., and intern with the 2016 Democratic National Convention Committee in Philadelphia. He's also a former field organizer for Hillary Clinton's 2016 presidential campaign. Chris, such an honor to have you back. It's always a privilege to have you on the political mic, so thanks for joining again. And next up, the only first-time guest for the evening is going to be Mr. Egud Nwangpa. Mr. Nwangpa is currently a vice president at one of the largest financial services institutions in the world. He is part of the Superior Diversity and Responsible Sourcing team, where he serves as a supplier diversity manager. specifically for the local markets and partnerships. In his position, Egu serves as an advocate for small and diverse businesses, a liaison to key partner organizations, a project manager for strategic initiatives, and a manager and analyst of related supplier diversity spend data. He also serves as a formal advisor for the Nwangpa family business, Teguza Solutions, which is a digital media, events, marketing, and advertising firm located in the greater New York area. He earned his bachelor's of business administration degree with an emphasis in accounting from Andrews University in Michigan, where he graduated as a member of the prestigious J.N. Andrews Honors Program. He holds an MBA from the R.H. Smith School of Business at the University of Maryland, where his focus area was global strategy, and he's a certified public accountant. He's a certified internal auditor, a chartered global management accountant, and he's a member of the NABA, AICPA, IIA, MACPA, NYSSCPA, and GWSCPA. Very accomplished gentleman. In his spare time, he enjoys spending time with his family. So, Mr. Nwangpa, it's such a privilege to have you on. I had the honor of being on his podcast a few weeks back. Now I'm just returning the favor.
Appreciate it, sir.
And last but certainly not least, Ms. Camille Moore. Camille Moore is a graduate of Oakwood University in Huntsville, Alabama, and she is a Carnegie Mellon University Heinz College graduate as well. She is a recent Congressional Black Caucus Foundation Energy Fellow and the current 2020 Fellow with the Business Council for Sustainable Energy, where she's focusing on legislation that will diversify the clean workforce of the future. Her interests and experiences include foreign affairs, energy, environment, and minority serving institutions. Such a great panel. Let's jump right in. So much is going on in Georgia specifically. It's become the political capital of the nation. And so this past Sunday, there were two debates. Well, I guess if you want to call the first one a debate, Senator David Perdue, the current incumbent senator for Georgia, who was elected in 2014, decided not to attend the debate against his challenger, Jon Ossoff. Kelly Loeffler, who was appointed, was facing off against her challenger, Raphael Warnock. It was a very interesting debate, I would say, from what I've seen. Kelly Loeffler started almost every sentence by addressing Raphael Warnock as radical liberal Raphael Warnock, almost as if it was his name. She accused him of not creating a single job in his life and of introducing or inviting Fidel Castro, to come to his church. Warnock responded that he has nothing to do with Fidel Castro, and that in fact his church actually had a jobs creation program. She also tried to portray, she tries to play the same game that it seemed that Lindsey Graham was playing, that Steve Daines was playing, all across the country. The argument and the theme was, my opponent is too radical, too far left, and if we let them in, our values are going to be just done away with. Our way of life is going to be under attack, and you have no choice. Vote for me. Vote for, me. I've been in Congress defending our conservative norms. And so I'm wondering if this one-size-fits-all approach seems to be working, being that, Georgia aside, it seems like the Republicans had a fairly well election night. They made some gains in the House, and they were able to hold on to the Senate. As of right now, it seems that way. Of course, that can certainly change. 538 polling showed that Ossoff is at 48.6%, while Perdue is at 48.2% as of December the 10th, which is today. Warnock is at 49.1%, Loeffler at 47.1%. So it's a neck and neck race, but the Dems seem to be, just at the tip of a lead right now. And I'm wondering if this is going to have any kind of effect. This messaging of, you can't trust my opponent, they're too far left. Trying to portray this as a us versus them grievance politics, will that serve them well? I'm going to open up the floor to anyone who wants to jump in.
I'll go if no one else does. I think with Georgia, you have a unique problem, right? You have really two out of touch, really rich people on one end calling the other people out of touch. So, you have a billionaire in Kelly Loeffler, then you have a multimillionaire ex-business executive in Perdue, and they're basically calling two people who are known for being amongst the people as being out of touch with the rest of society. So whether that argument wins or not, I would say, it depends. The polling hasn't really worked out too favorably for the Democrats this year. So a close race or a tie, I would say, goes to Republicans. So they need to make some space in the next few weeks in order for me to feel a little bit more comfortable saying that either of the Democratic candidates, which I love them both, can win.
And to your point, Loeffler, as of 2019, has a net worth of $165 million. Forbes magazine called her the richest politician on Capitol Hill right now. So that messaging of I'm for the people that Warnock is trying to get through, I'm wondering if that's having an effect, because when you look at the counties, and a lot of people, I had made an election map, and I had said that Georgia's going to go blue, and folks were texting me and sending me all kinds of private messages saying, why would you say that? That's just, giving people false hope. Why would you even consider, thinking that this mirage is actually something tangible? And I said, well, look, I had just moved to the state. I've seen the ads. I don't know much about Georgia politics yet, but from what I've seen, looking at the counties, Gwinnett County, Fulton County, DeKalb County, all these areas outside the Atlanta metro area that have a predominantly African-American presence, and they're also a suburban area. A lot of people don't realize when we think of suburbs, typically you're thinking mostly, middle-class, Caucasian, American populated area. But in these counties, you have actually a Black suburban presence. And so in Gwinnett County, Biden enjoyed 88.4% over Trump's 40.2%. Fulton County, 72.6 over Trump's 26.2. DeKalb, 83.1 over Trump's 15.7. So, I mean, with these numbers, in the aggregate amount, it just seemed to be pointing in that direction that if Biden doesn't win, Trump's certainly, in trouble. This trend is not going in his direction. Do you think that this kind of will spill over as we're getting closer to the 5th of January with these runoffs?
I think yes and no.
Kind of hard to know. Go ahead.
I think yes and no. We've seen in the past that Democrats are able to win big when Trump is not on the ballot. We saw it in the 2018 midterms. We saw Georgia, a state that generally a lot of election analysts and predictors don't really see as a state that is really swingy, come within 3 points of electing a Black woman to be the Democratic governor. And even this cycle, with all the polling errors, Georgia polling has been pretty accurate. Now, speaking to specific races, anything can happen in a race this close, but it is important to note with Loeffler and Perdue, the state of the Georgia Republican Party, which is eating itself alive. Part of Trump's voter fraud claims is that Kelly Loeffler and Brian Kemp conspired to keep Doug Collins off of the runoff ballot. So, if Kelly Loeffler had, any moral courage at all, she'd stand up and say, either there is no fraud or there is fraud and I shouldn't be the one running right now. So, she can't have it both ways. It's also important to mention, you mentioned her personal wealth, that one of the things she spends her money on is owning a WNBA franchise. And to that effect, her own employees, the Atlanta Dream, don't even like her that much. They wore, to the point where during the players' strike over the summer, they wore Vote Warnock shirts. As far as David Perdue not debating, that also has to do with the fact that he's a very successful day trader. That's his day job, not being a U.S. senator. And he knows he can't answer to that. So it's about whether or not each candidate can actually stand up and say, here's why I'm right. And, because we've seen that Republicans, as much dirt as they like to sling, they end up pretty flat-footed when there's a candidate that they're running against that can say, you guys are lying, none of that is true, and here's why.
Professor Cook, you're going to say something?
No, I was about to say, two things. One, I'm happy to be on with all you folks, especially people from Oakwood. One of my best friends in law school is a graduate of Oakwood, and he constantly abused me for mispronouncing Huntsville. But besides that, I still can't get it right. But anyway, I think that what you've been talking about is good. I mean, the subtext of the campaign in Georgia is pretty much the playbook of most of these reactionary Republicans, which is to other the opposition, is to make them sort of alien and totally unreliable, undesirable, and no matter how they package it, at the end of the day, the subtext is you can't trust them. They're not us. They will take something that we have away from us. The challenge in Georgia is the challenge across America, quite frankly, is that minority folk, young people, people with a progressive bent have to go vote. There are enough of them in Georgia to make a difference, to unelect these people. But they've got to turn out in huge numbers. And if that doesn't happen, if you don't get that turnout, then Purdue is going to win. Because just as Joe Biden, Jim Clyburn, Ms. Harris, whatever, animated people on the left, Mr. Trump and his othering group are animating people on the right. And so there's got to be a significant turnout. I think Georgia is absolutely winnable. I think the odds are against it just because of the historical malaise in too much of the Black and progressive community to go vote. But it's doable, and people have got to decide that they're going to make a difference and go vote.
And, you know, to your point, Professor, this kind of idea that if you don't vote for me, our values are at risk here, you know? So even if you don't 100% like the person,
oh yeah,
what's at stake is abortion rights. Not the right to not have an abortion. Right. What's at stake is, gun control rights and all of these things that the Republicans have made as hallmark wedge issues that decide you're either for us or for them. And, you know, when I'm thinking about this grievance kind of politics that's taken over, especially, I guess, accelerated during these past 4 years, I'm noticing that the Democrats seem to be capitalizing that as well. Ossoff and Warnock both pointing fingers at their opponents, saying these people made a profit off of you not knowing about the pandemic earlier on. And Ossoff was debating an empty podium. And he said that David Perdue's presence was evidence of him being feeling entitled to the seat. He said, this is not David Perdue's seat, this is the people's seat. And this kind of messaging of, you know, a distance between the people in Washington and average folks is something that they're trying to use and flip on its head. The Republicans usually are the ones to kind of make that case. That's, you know, that was Trump's brand. But now he's saying, well, look, he got information from the CDC, he got information from public health officials, and then he was buying up shares in manufacturers for vaccines and medical equipment. That shows that he's in for himself and he's not in for you. And I'm wondering if that's really what's causing this neck and neck polling that we're seeing. You know, usually, remember, John Ossoff ran before, I believe in 2016. And then right, and he lost. It seems much closer now for not just Ossoff but Warnock as well. Usually in a regular year, to be honest with you, Warnock would not look like a candidate that has a chance. And I've heard folks in Georgia say, "Well, Warnock's not going to win." I said, "Why?" I said, "Look, he did well already." Well, when you consider the fact that Loeffler's support was divided with David Collins, you have to. But I say, look, just like Herb's support was divided, Warnock's support could have been divided because he's running against other Democrats too. Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh.
No. Please go.
No. I was just going to say, I think that Loeffler and Perdue are doing a good job at appealing to their audience. They know exactly who is listening to them, and they're not really worried about the progressives because they know that they're not going to vote for them. So they're doing a really good job at honing in on their particular audience. I don't think that I think it's working in a sense, but it's really not working because as you know, we're in a whole pandemic right now. And so I think Georgia is seeing that, if we continue to allow these people to take office, and also they're learning more about, how the Senate works and, the fact that we could possibly get Mitch McConnell out of office. And that is, well, not out of office, but no longer as the majority leader. But they're seeing that they can actually make a change and seeing the difference that it will make. And that I think that Warnock and Ossoff have a good job at have a good chance at bringing this in. I think that as of right now, people are still a little iffy about voting, but I think that being that they saw that their votes made a change in turning Georgia blue, they're going to get out and vote, and they're going to vote for the right people.
So, go ahead, Chris. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
If I could add, and Mike, once again, thank you for having me on. Glad to be a part of, I guess, season 2 of the Political Mike. But as much of what you all were saying was true, and I think that in this campaign before January 5th, what Warnock and Ossoff have to do is make the Georgia race about Georgia. Part of the effective messaging that we saw espoused by the GOP in this past cycle was them saying that there was so much national money from Senator Schumer and national Democrats being poured into, races that should have been close in Iowa, Montana, and other parts of the country that, people were saying, like, listen, we don't want national Democrats, being involved in Maine politics or Iowa politics. And so much of that messaging was pretty effective. And I think, now that we have learned that lesson, we have to make the Georgia race about Georgia. And the second thing is a part of the aftermath of the 2020 election. I listened to a podcast that was involving Vice President-elect Joe Biden's campaign manager, Jen O'Malley Dillon. And she was saying one of the biggest factors that she followed in order to determine where money should go, and also in terms of likelihood of winning a state, was whether his candidate or candidates, down the ballot were closer to 49, 50%, or 51%. As opposed to being at 47% and having a 2-point margin, right? What she's saying is about getting close to having a 50% win share, as opposed to trying to have like a 2-point margin and only reaching 47% of the vote in the polls. And so we have to look very closely on how that'll look as we get closer to January 5th. If Warnock can get close to hovering around 49 and 50%, then I think that the likelihood of him being able to eclipse, a victory will increase. But if he's still, kind of hovering at 47, 46%, then I think that it may be a difficult time for him to be able to get enough votes to win, as well as for John Ossoff as well. So keep in mind on that.
And that's a good point, Chris, because, I've said this all the time. The Democrats have learned that if you localize the race, that's better for them. Because there's an ad, for instance, that shows Chuck Schumer saying, "We take Georgia and then we take America." Loeffler has been repeating that line for so many times. And the idea is to scare people into thinking you're running against Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and you're running against Chuck Schumer and you're running against Nancy Pelosi. You're not running against Warnock. You're not running against Ossoff. You're running against them. And Warnock and Ossoff are saying, hey, what about COVID-19 relief for the folks in Henry County and folks in DeKalb County? And I'm wondering if that's really going to hit home closer to people in the middle of the road, people who held their nose and said, look, I'm voting for Trump in 2016. I'm voting for the Republicans. People who may have voted for Biden, but then they voted for the Republicans down ballot this year. There's a report that came out today that said that a liberal group, the Voter Protection Project, is going to be spending $1 million in Georgia Senate runoff elections. And the Political Action Committee is going to be airing its first attack ad as part of the efforts, slamming Republican Senator Loeffler. And I'm wondering if this is plus coupled with the fact that Biden has been reported to be going to be campaigning in Georgia too on Monday, I believe, which is going to be the first day of early voting in the state of Georgia. Will these efforts be enough to kind of give the Democrats a little bit more of an edge?
Yeah. So I think we shouldn't forget the fact that you beat an incumbent Republican president in Georgia, right? That's not a small feat, right? So it was a historic vote that went out. There was an effort there. The early vote in Georgia was outrageous, to the point where even Republican pollsters were looking at it and saying there's no way, right? But there was a way, and it actually happened. I don't know if there won't be some political retribution for that, is what I'm thinking, with some of the Republicans who felt like maybe we didn't come out and strong enough to support. But we'll see. I think once we see the early vote coming out, when I was seeing on social media, people in Georgia were talking about, I stood in line for 7 hours. I stood in line for 6 hours. I stood in line for 8 hours. And I was texting Mike, like, I don't know about Georgia, but he was right. I think that effort, when people were willing to stay outside for 8 hours, will they do it again now in the cold, is what we should be asking. Will they do it now with COVID-19 raging, is what we should be asking. So we'll be able to see once we look at the early vote on where the trends are going.
And I kind of want to use it as a segue to pivot because it's related. Trump's continual refusal to acknowledge the fact that he lost Georgia and he lost Michigan and he lost a lot of these key battleground states seems to be having a backlash effect on the Republicans. The lawyer for Trump, who looked like a mini version of Trump, when I saw him, I thought that was Trump at first. He had a red hat and blonde hair. But he was making the case saying, Brian Kemp needs to resign and as far as he's concerned, lock him up. And then you had Ronna McDaniel, the RNC chair, having to level with these folks, say, no, your vote does matter. Please, you need to come and vote. You need to come out. And they were saying, well, if it's already decided, what's the point of me taking time out of, my day to go and waste my energies on something that's already fixed? Camille, do you think that this notion that the election is rigged and this hallucinatory idea that is somehow already decided will actually shoot Republicans in the foot on January the 5th?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Mike, for having me. And thank you for allowing me to be a part of this great panel. I've heard so many great points so far. And one thing that I was reading this week is that the GOP has actually raised about 400% more than the Democratic Party since the election. So no, when we're looking at dollars and cents, the GOP is doing quite well in that area. Trumpism makes money. It goes deep into this instinct of us versus them. We understand that at a gut level, in a very visceral way, especially in a time where we are less than 8 days out from the end of this legislative calendar. And we literally we're going to leave DC without a deal. People are hungry. People are going through awful times that we are creating. We're creating these circumstances for people not to be out. And it's been our choice to keep the economy stalled. But, I like the point that was made earlier, where someone was talking about, the difference between national messaging and local messaging and how we need to make the race about Georgia. Chris, that was you. I like that point because, what we do in Georgia has implications for January and what we're doing for stimulus, how the Senate's being run, these three branches, how are they going to work together? And then we're already looking at 2022. The midterms, we're really already calling it for the Republicans. And I think the one reason why a lot of strategists are saying the midterms will swing in favor of the Republicans, not just because the person who's president, usually the party misses out on a lot of seats, but we have to change this messaging. We have to, I think as a Democratic Party, we've got to change this messaging to more of that local tenor and really focus on the local messages and not so much the national ones. It is a balancing act. There's a lot to talk about and a lot that you can't really mention because we're really stalemated, but unfortunately, I don't think it is hurting the Republican Party at the moment, at least not in dollar figures.
That's a good point. You know, when we were talking about campaign finance, the decision Citizens United in 2010 has far-reaching implications, and that's something we have to consider. Is not just the voting suppression efforts; it's the huge amounts of dollars pouring in. But I want to pivot a little bit to the defiance on not just Trump, but the Republican Party that's enabling him to continue down this path of not acknowledging Biden as the president-elect. As of right now, the Washington Post conducted a survey and found that only 25 congressional Republicans acknowledge President-elect Joe Biden's win in the 2020 election. That's equivalent to 1 in 10 GOP lawmakers. That's 90%. I'm wondering, not just how far this is going to go. That's what everyone's asking. But, Trump had also said today that we should not have the presidency transition to an illegitimate president. That's what he said. And I'm thinking, out of the two men, one won the popular vote and the Electoral College. One only won the Electoral College. So if we're just going to go by that comparison alone, it just seems to me that the one who won 2 out of 2 just seems to be more the legitimate president to me. But one of the things I was excited about finishing your final for, Professor Cook, was getting to this book here, Rage, by Bob Woodward. And, I was looking at some of the things, and it really just gives you insight into Trump's mind. This is Bob Woodward, who was a world-renowned journalist who made his big break with the Watergate scandal in 1974. He had to sit down with President Trump, and he said this on page 187. I raised President Obama as an issue and said that many thought he was smart. This is what Trump says. I don't know. I don't think Obama's smart. See, I think he's highly overrated. And I don't think he's a great speaker. Oh, hey, look, I went to the best schools. I did great. And Trump says, I had an uncle who was a professor at MIT for 40 years, one of the most respected in the history of the school. For 40 years, my father's brother and my father was smarter than he was. It's good stock. They talk about the elite, really the elite. They have nice houses. No, I have much better than them. I have better everything than them, including education. This is an important moment in history, I said. This is Bob Woodward speaking, where they're going to impeach you. This is during the impeachment proceeding in December of last year. The House is going to impeach you. He says, yeah. And you're sitting in the Oval Office here, and you're content and happy, proud. Trump says, yeah. Any angst? Trump says, no. There's another excerpt I wanted to get to, but so far it just conveys the way in which he's viewing the world in terms of, I'm the winner. When I compare myself to my predecessor, Obama, I deserve to be here. I came from the best stock. And so there's a sense of entitlement that seems to be in his psyche. And when you think about what Mary Trump had wrote about earlier this summer with her book, Too Much and Never Enough, it just fits right in. And so you have these insights from President Trump's mind, just showing him why there's a defiance right now. People are wondering how long this is going to take. I think it's going to take until forever, because this seems to be seeded into his psyche. I want to open up the floor. Any other thoughts on what's going on right now and the implications they have?
Well, you hit on something. I think that Ariana and Camille talked about. The 74 million people voted for Donald Trump. Okay, that's more people than voted for anybody except for Joe Biden. And what that really speaks to is part of what I think Ms. Moore talked about when she talked about the inability of Democrats writ large to speak to people's issues in their local communities and in whatever they care about. And so sometimes you ask yourself, how can it be that 74 million of my fellow citizens want 4 more years of this? This is nuts. This is not normal. Why would they want more of that? But part of it is not so much what Donald Trump has done or has really offered these people. It's what the Democrats didn't offer people. It's 30, 40 years of Democrats not talking with people, but talking to people. It's 40 years of Democrats telling people, this is what's best for you. I know what it is, and I don't really care what you say. You can't say to a steel worker in Ohio who only has a high school degree, has got a relatively nice life working in a steel mill because of union wages and whatnot, that we're going to close your steel plant. We're going to take away that job, that standard of living, but we're not going to give you anything else. Okay. We're not going to replace that. So it's all fine and good to talk about the environment. It's all fine and good to talk about how the country ought to move to a new economic platform, a new economic modality. But you've got to bring the people who are part of the old modality along. And what Democrats haven't done is they haven't really spoken to those people. And that frustration, coupled with the inherent racism in American society, because I don't believe this is just about economic insecurity. So I'm not saying that at all. But the economic insecurity helps. You know, there's a T-shirt that I used to wear that says, you know, don't blame racism, blame capitalism. Okay, because racism is a tool of capitalists that is used to promote and maintain a capitalist modality. It's race is a construct, as we all know. There is no black or other race. It's all one race. People have different skin colors, different all kinds of things, but it's all one race of people. But the people who exploit that do it for an economic reason. So until Democrats really get their minds around what are we really going to do? What are we really going to speak with these people about? How are we going to feel their pain? How are we going to address their concerns, as opposed to having somebody at one of the preeminent think tanks, maybe the Howard University, come up with a bright idea about how the world ought to work and then say, you got to do this because this is our idea, without having an iterative process about, well, what do you really think about that, Mr. or Mrs. citizen in, you know, Hamilton, Ohio, or you know, Kennesaw Mountain, Tennessee. And so I think that's part of the problem, that Donald Trump is not a genius, not a political genius, not a political wizard. What he is a salesman. That's his whole life. And he has figured out how to sell people a false sense of security about their insecurity. And he understands it almost innately, and he makes you think that he is for you. I told Mr. Taylor once before, you know, I saw some guy on TV talking about why he was supporting Donald Trump, because Donald Trump is a self-made man. He started off as a construction worker and built this empire. Well, Donald Trump has never wielded a shovel in his life, but somehow people have sort of gotten that in their heads that he is them, they are he, and he is not them. He has never been them. He could care less about them. But that's what I think the challenge that Democrats have to have. And we've got to get rid of some of these old people who run the Democrat Party. We've got to have some young people. We've got to have people who are talking about the next millennium and not talking about the past. You know, my group needs to get off the stage, and you folks need to be center stage. But that's the challenge. If you're going to turn that 74 million people thing around, that's what you got to do, because those people aren't voting for Donald Trump literally. They're voting against what they think is hurting them. And you got to get out of the business of hurting them.
You know, and that's a good point. And to that point, just to extend it a little bit further, and now he's been able to convince these 74 million folks, or a good portion of them, that they have. It's not just him that has been cheated, right, but they have been cheated because of this election. 344. Just one more excerpt, real quick. Bob Woodward gets into the topic of the election with President Trump, and he says, you know, this is after the George Floyd incident in May of this year. He says, well, this is Bob Woodward. I said, we're going into the election. Everyone keeps asking, suppose it's a close election and it's contested. What are you going to do? Everyone says Trump is going to stay in the White House if it's contested. Have you? Trump interrupts and says, well, I'm not. I don't want to even comment on that, Bob. I don't want to comment on that at this time. He goes on to talk about his future and says, the economy, I'll do it again. It's already started. By September, October, the economy will start heating up. And once it starts heating up, and in big numbers, we're going to have a phenomenal following year. But by September, October, maybe sooner, but by September, October, you'll start to see the tremendous jumps in employment and GDP. And by October, it'll be really big. and the numbers will be accounted, and I'll win the election. Watch. Better than where I was before. Better where I was riding high. And that's the mindset I believe he had going into this election. And this belief that he's won has come out of this idea that I've built the economy. This to your point, Professor. I've done this. And discounting the fact that GDP growth was increasing from the year 2011 all the way to the 2 consecutive years after Obama had left office. This notion that the election was rightfully his, despite the numbers, and despite the lack of evidence. Just saying that there's something there when there's no there.
Right.
Calling fraud where there isn't. I'm wondering if when we do get into a close election, say another Bush v. Gore incident, Lord help us, like what's going to happen then? If we're in this tribal environment, in something like that. I want to get anyone's thoughts on this.
I have a thought. I don't know if we'll be, just for your last comment, I don't know, this is not Bush versus Gore because these cases are not sticking. States are not hearing them. So at a certain point, it will definitely unravel. But I will say one thing that I was reading is that there is consensus within a group of the national security realm that found that the 9/11 attacks, not that they could have been prevented, but there's information to tell us that the situation that did happen in Bush versus Gore, because that transition was so drawn out, and information was not handed hand to hand as it should be in a peaceful and just transition. That is a direct threat to our national security. Where transition is not for the photo ops, it's not the press conference. It's not so that we can all do this transition math for those of us who are in Washington to figure out if we're going to know someone who's in the administration. It is literally handing over the keys, the trade secrets, the information about where the United States is, what they're doing, what they're holding back, what they're a part of. Those things are very, very important. And Trumpism has done a lot to politics. And it really is just a symptom of what we're going through at a much more deeper level, I think, as a globe, but also as a country. But I am very unsettled at the fact that the Republican Party cannot stand up to an impeached president who clearly has not won, does not have a chance of winning this election lawfully. We can't stand down to him. It really makes me wonder. It makes me wonder where Trump will be 2022, where he will be for the next election, and what type of cohort is actually coalescing around him. I love what Professor Cook said. Trump is not a genius. Let's all say it together. He is not a genius. He has a party that is ride or die. They have found a great opportunity to stand behind a man who is literally giving them picked fruit of the best, consensus, literally a message that they can stand behind. But there is no message. It is raw energy and it's raw emotion that we've seen this summer. It spills over, and there's just a complete irresponsibility in how you care for people and listen to them. So those are my thoughts.
If I could jump in here,
Yeah.
like Professor Cook said, and like Camille noted earlier, this is partially a messaging issue. There has been kind of a smugness among Democratic leadership, among prominent white liberals, especially, that we don't have to worry about what Trump is trying to do in the courts. That Republicans aren't really acknowledging Biden because the law is going to catch up with him and the norms are going to work. That doesn't really hold weight when you consider that Trump has surrounded himself with loyalists. Things like the Justice Department, which are supposed to be independent, are no longer independent. We can't depend on the Justice Department to kind of go to Trump and say, hey, you can't do that. These norms only work if there are people willing to uphold the norms. And just because so far Trump's legal challenges are falling flat on their face, and the one win that he's boasting involved how far poll watchers were allowed to stand from vote counters does not mean that this is all over and fine. You know, Trump actually literally tried to get courts to overturn the vote. And who knows what a halfway competent candidate and legal team will be able to do that in the future. The messaging issue problem to me isn't just that leadership has been silent on it and that leadership hasn't done enough to explain, hey, this is a really bad thing. It's that it's the national media as well, because they've been branding the Republicans that won't acknowledge Biden, those who are signing on to the lawsuit in Texas, as cowards that are afraid of Trump. So it gives them cover to say down the line because these people are all going to stay in office. Well, I was just really afraid. I didn't know what I could do. I was trapped between a rock and a hard place. Really, these aren't cowards. These are complicit. These people see with their own eyes. They know there wasn't fraud. You think, like, I refuse to believe that Ted Cruz genuinely thinks there was electoral fraud. Because if there was actual fraud, we would have taken out Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell. But, you know, it's power that they're after. And they know they're after it, and they're being given cover because we can't agree on a message. There is not some magic phrase that Democrats can say that's going to convince the base, the activist wing, the centrists, and the moderate Republicans. But they need to fill that void with something. Otherwise, the only people that will hear on the fraud fraud airwaves is Republicans saying that there was massive fraud.
Yeah, and to your point, Nate, I had been saying all the time, people kept saying, oh, well, what if we have another Bush v. Gore? I said, this is not Bush versus Gore. This is not a situation where you have hanging chads in different counties and the votes are being counted differently, and it's a matter of what was the voter's intent, and then you have an equal protection issue because the votes are not counted. There's nothing there. In order to have standing, in order to have a judicial issue for the Supreme Court to grant certiorari for, you have to allege that the Supreme Court is likely to issue a holding or impose some kind of relief that would address the harm, and there is no harm, unless they can articulate. And you hear illegal experts say all the time, outside the courtroom, they'll say there's fraud, but they cannot say that inside of the courtroom. And because I took I took the model rules of professional responsibility class in spring, I'm like, why do some of these folks still have their bar licenses? To be honest with you, like, why are they allowed to go ahead and make these out of court statements that are prejudicial, with no basis in fact or reality, and live to see another day with their bar license? It doesn't make sense. But also, I'm thinking historically, at the times when the challenger did defeat the incumbent. This has only happened 4 times between 1932 and now, 3 times since World War II. You're going back to 1980 with Jimmy Carter being ousted by Reagan. I don't think Walter Cronkite or Tom Brokaw or any of the media would have given Jimmy Carter any oxygen if Jimmy Carter was going to act this way and act as if, he's not going to acknowledge President-elect Reagan. They're not going to go ahead and share classified information with Reagan's team. I think they would have stopped giving him press coverage and focused solely on Reagan, focused solely on the Iranian hostages coming in. And I think it would have damaged the Democratic Party in 84 and 88. Going back to 92 with George H.W. Bush, I think the same thing would have happened. I don't think the media right now need to stop giving oxygen to this story that Trump is not acknowledging the election. Unless Trump is doing something productive pertaining to COVID relief, he doesn't need coverage to me. Chris?
Well, here's the issue. This is not 1980 and it's not 1992, where you had, 3 major media channels that everyone will flock to get information and to get what they call reliable news. Instead, we are in 2020, where if you log on to Twitter or Instagram, you can see President Trump tweeting all types of, false statements, lies, random doctored videos that he's posting and sharing, things that are just clearly not true, but they're easy to view. They're easy to share to people who may be gullible or looking for some sort of confirmation bias. And so we are in a very different environment as it relates to media, journalism, truth, fact, and fiction, which has been able to allow for Trump to really succeed in this political environment. It's not just the the traditional media that is, maybe abetting him or assisting him in his ways, but also there's just more ways in which he can get his message out and for people to try to, take it in. Just for the first time this week, Fox News their viewership was actually beaten by Newsmax, this like far right wing, broadcast, I think website and TV show and whatever it is, streaming service that people are flocking to because they're saying that Fox News may not even be, right wing enough, or they're mad at Fox News for declaring Arizona too soon for Biden. And so we are in a very different media environment. And I think that it's going to take some really hard work as Americans from corporate structures, government structures to try to figure out how we can get to a place again where there is truth, there's objectivity, so that we can, at least we can still have our debates, we can still have our problems, but we can also have those problems under, one common truth. And we don't have that right now. And so that's going to be something that we have to navigate for the next few years as well.
Yeah. And I like what you said, Chris. And, to your point with this whole 2024 thing, there was a report that said that during Inauguration Day, Trump is going to have a big 2024 campaign rally. If the election in 2024 is all about who can be more like Donald Trump, Trump is going to win that, So in my mind, if I'm a Josh Hawley of Missouri or Nikki Haley or Marco Rubio, and I have political ambitions, even his Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, he wants to run for president. Sure. These folks, they need to me, learn from 2016. When you had towards the waning days of the primary, Kasich, Rubio, Cruz refusing to bow out because each of them felt like they were the best one to go toe-to-toe with Trump. Each of them canceled each other out. Trump rose from the ashes and then became the nominee. I think they need to learn from that situation. Sure. If they play the same playbook from 16, Trump already has the advantage because the idea of him being president is not a novelty. It's not, people won't laugh at it. We've seen it tangibly for 4 years. I think you're going to say something.
Yeah. So one thing I was going to say, my brother's an attorney too, so we have these discussions. And I was talking to him one day. I said maybe the learning or the case study that America is going to have to look to is Germany after World War II, when people wake up finally and say, "What did I just do? What was I just supporting for all this time?" And really have to figure out how they can tear down this legacy of really an interruption of precedent, right? Because every precedent that we've had, all the norms that we were used to, all the things we expect have all been trampled on to a point where this is actually viewed as a possibility that a president would not go to the inauguration of the next president. No one has ever even dreamt of that, right? And I think that we are going to have to get to a point where people have to look at it like, what did we just do? We've made such damaging acts. What have we just done? And I think one thing you brought up, Mike, which is important, is that move away from Fox News, right? That's a major thing for that to happen. Newsmax was laughed at 60 days ago. 90 days ago, they were a joke. 60 days, they were a blip on the map, and now they're actually taking ratings away from Fox News. Some of that is a shift from what technology has actually done, where people are streaming now, people are looking at other places, internet sites like that, internet, digital, web-based news sites like that are going to creep up and have a lot more strength than your traditional news outlets that like Fox News. I can't believe I'm calling that traditional or news, but that's what we'll say. But not to poo-poo on the Fox crowd, but I just think that you're seeing a shift here in the fact that he has that much control over people, that he can create a whole new news outlet instead of what the go-to was for the last 20 years, which was Fox News.
Chris, go ahead.
And while I'm listening to this discussion and it largely being focused on the outgoing president, I do think that part of what we have to do is also build on successes that we've seen recently. And the reality is, despite all the news that we've seen, the crazy tweets, the all of the stuff that we've seen, Joe Biden did win the election. and a Democrat will be entering the White House on January 20th. And people did vote. 80 million people did vote. 6 million more people did vote for Joe Biden than Donald Trump. And we have to kind of scrutinize why, right? And as we continue to see more data come from exit polls and, more stories come out in the media about what caused folks who were formerly Trump voters or Romney voters to flip to Joe Biden, and figuring out like what will it take for us to be able to build those successes at the White House level, but also, obviously we have to continue to try to earn more seats at the House level and try to reclaim the Senate, which has been, and given, the Republicans have had a national advantage in terms of the Senate breakdown anyway. But I'm saying generally we have to figure out how can we build on the successes. And part of it is like at some point we have to turn the channel from Trump, right? Whether it's going to be on January 20th or it's going to be now, because I feel like the more we give him more coverage, as you said, in the media, but also us as citizens, the more opportunities we give him more power, right? And I think that we have to figure out how we can, learn from those mistakes, learn, like as you were saying, learn from these last 4 years and then breaking the precedent, but also figure out how we can start anew and turn the channel and look forward to the future.
I think in a very almost perverse sense, it's going to be the presidential ambitions of people like Nikki Haley and Marco Rubio and Josh Hawley and Tom Cotton that might actually be the thing that gets Trump to sit down. A lot was made earlier, like in the first few days after the election, when most Republicans were silent, and then Donald Trump Jr. said, "Hey, what happened to all these people I thought were Republicans who said they supported my dad? Why aren't they saying anything?" And then almost instantly, Nikki Haley jumped up and said, "We need to count every legal vote." But once you convince these people that giving Trump this kind of oxygen means they can't be president they don't have a chance at being president in 2025, I think we'll start to see some defections. But again, it's not going to be out of a true sense of patriotism or courage. It's going to be because of their own ambition. Now, like you mentioned, Chris, we do need to focus on the incoming administration. We've got an administration that's willing to work with us on climate. We've got an administration that's willing to work with us on reproductive justice, on racial justice, and things like that. And we've got an administration that actually supports DC statehood. And we've got senators that support that idea. For the first time, we might actually get significant traction on that, not to mention the pragmatic purpose of adding 2 Democratic senators, of course. But there's a host of possibilities that we can do, of options that we have now that weren't available a few months ago. And we need to start focusing on that. We won the presidential election. A lot of countries, when people like Trump come along, it takes years before we see them leave. We got Trump out after 4 years. That's something to be proud of. There is work to be done at the statewide levels, in the House, but we can actually take a sigh of relief and start doing some victory lapping.
So one of the developments that have also been made about the aftermath in this election is that Trump is actually and Barr, the Attorney General, ramping up executions. So since July of this year, the federal government executed the first prisoner in nearly 2 decades. Most death penalties were meted out in state prisons for state crimes, but the Trump administration, federal government, the Justice Department allowed the use of lethal injections to kill 8 people. And it intends to kill 5 more before President Trump and Attorney General William Barr leave office on January the 20th. So at the moment, the federal government accounts for just over half of the 15 death sentences carried out this year. So if both the pending executions this week are carried out, that will be 10 out of the 17 conducted this year being the responsibility of the Trump administration. This rush to go ahead and carry out these executions. And it's also noteworthy that the 7 state executions carried out so far, there were 3 in Texas. There was 1 in Georgia, Tennessee, and Alabama. There was 1 in Missouri. All of these are former slave states. I think when I saw the lineup of the folks who are lined up to be executed, I only saw 1 or 2 Caucasian faces in there. Professor Cook, what do you make of this?
Well, I mean, I think there are a lot of people in America who believe in the death penalty, who think it is absolutely right and proper. black, white, men, women, young, old. Mr. Trump and Mr. Barr are delivering to that group of people, many of whom are his supporters, what they want. They want somebody dead for committing what they think is a capital offense. Long time ago, got off the death penalty train personally, but I understand that there's a lot of people who are right there. When I was a prosecutor, I never tried a capital case. Well, I never tried a case where the death penalty was in play. I tried murder cases, but the death penalty was not part of what we were ever asking for, just because of the nature of that particular offense. So I don't really know how it plays out in your head when you're actually asking for somebody to die, literally ask somebody to die. But I think that, Nathaniel said something that sort of struck me, is that why don't these enablers, because I agree with you, they are enablers. They are not just humoring a toddler. But Nikki Haley, Josh Hawley, they're all politicians. They understand exactly what Donald Trump is doing, that he has taken the oxygen out of the room for their candidacy, but they're still playing along with him, which really makes no sense to me, because they don't have to wait until January 6th or the 20th to come to that realization. They know where this train is headed. They know that if they don't do something now, it will be too late to do something later on for their political ambitions. Now, maybe they figure they're young enough and they can spend 4 years, not worrying about it, at least 8 years, this coming 4 years, and then 4 years of a possible presidency. But that is the puzzling thing about this for so many of the so-called professional Republicans. Donald Trump is not a career, lifelong Republican. He's an opportunist. And there are lots of those. Ms. Loeffler is another opportunist. But there are a lot of professional politicians, people who got into this business almost from the time they were out of high school until they get themselves elected, and they keep moving up the ladder. And the thing that makes no sense to me is, why do these professional politicians hitch themselves so closely to Donald Trump? Because at some point, whether it's January 20th, 2021, or at some point in the future, he will no longer be able to drag them along with him. So what are they going to do when he's gone? I mean, I just don't understand what Josh Hawley's future is, if he thinks he has one, when Donald Trump is off the scene. But these people are enablers. These are not just loyal Republicans following the party lines, supporting the party leader. These are actual enablers. And there's a school of thought, I've said this in class, they ought to be taken out and shot. I mean, there really is no rehabilitation for these people. It's much like, you guys are too young to remember this, but the Vichy French after World War II. The collaborators who collaborated with the Nazis, they could not be rehabilitated in the minds of the newly freed French people. They were tried and convicted. Many of them were shot. Some of them were hung. Because you can't fix that. You have gone much beyond a step too far. One of the things historically that has distinguished the United States from many other countries, Western democracies, whatever, is that the political differences were political differences. They were differences about policy. We were not enemies, we were opponents. But what has happened over the last 20, 30 years, slowly but surely, is that people on the other side of the issue are not your opponents, they are your enemy. And that is the beginning of the end of American democracy, in my view. Because what makes it unique is that we can fight like cats and dogs about tax policy, abortion, but we can come together because we're all really fighting, playing on the same team. But that has changed so much. And it's very difficult to have a rational conversation with one of these Trump people, because they really believe you are the enemy, that you are some sort of alien who will destroy their way of life. And vice versa for many people on the opposite side. And so that's a real challenge going forward, is how do you do that? I was lucky enough to work in the media, with the media as a lawyer, and when there were really only 3 networks. And so I get what you're saying about everybody got their news from the same place. And if you didn't like the news, you turned it off. You listen to Walter Cronkite And if you didn't like Walter Cronkite, you just turned it off, and there wasn't anything else to do. You read the newspaper, played Tiddlywink, something like that. But now you can have all of your biases confirmed. If you don't like Rachel Maddow, you can turn on somebody on Fox or One America News or Newsmax, and they will tell you exactly what you want to hear. And that was the brilliance of Roger Ailes. Roger Ailes said, just keep telling them what they want to hear. We will never lose our audience. And that's what they do. And it's got nothing to do with journalism. It's got nothing to do with presenting facts or truth. It's got to do with selling soap, some product. It's got to do with selling a product. You keep eyeballs on this TV screen, you give them the ads, and you make a lot of money. And that's really all it's about. It's not about the objective presentation of information. And those of you who are burdened with a law degree understand that the First Amendment doesn't require anybody to be truthful or balanced. You have a right to say whatever the hell you want to say. So this idea that somehow the Post or NBC or CNN has to be fair is really a fiction. And Fox realized it was a fiction and said, well, we don't have to tell you the truth. We'll tell you what we want you to hear. And that has multiplied itself. And it's a real problem for the American public because you don't have a common set of facts. You don't have a common set of concerns to argue about. I'm arguing about my facts. You're arguing about your facts. And we're not talking about the same thing.
Yeah. Before I pivot to Camille real quick, it made me think of 2 Timothy 4:3. For the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but having itching ears shall heap to themselves teachers in accordance with their own lusts. I was having a conversation last night with someone, and I said, this whole tribalism, it's so easy to pinpoint. Well, it happened with Trump, or well, it happened with Obama's rise to the presidency in 2008, or it happened with the Tea Party. I think you have to go back to Jerry Falwell and Ronald Reagan. I think it happened in the late 70s, early 1980s, when evangelicals were firmly now consolidated in the camp of the right, and there were certain items on the agenda that if you don't check on them, then you're not one of us. I've had some folks tell me, how can you be a Democrat? Don't you know that you're going to have to believe this, that, and the other? And I said, there's no contract that you have to sign to say it's all or nothing. John Bel Edwards, the governor of Louisiana, is anti-abortion, and he's a Democrat. You look at Joe Manchin in the Senate. Camille, go ahead.
I was just going to add that the only thing you really need to know about the death penalty is that the United States and Belarus are the two countries who still allow it. I think that in and of itself is a statement about, I don't know, what can be a very controversial and personal topic for folks. But, it's almost like we've forgotten that we elect legislators. You're not electing your personal rep, someone who's going to espouse your issues and, have your content that you want to click on. They are there with the authority and with the responsibility to write bills to alter US tax code or your state code. That is really what we kind of need to get back to. I think the time, the time I think in our political arc where tribalism has worked, I think it could be coming to an end. You have kids who, like my sister just graduated high school. She knows what it's like to go through active shooter drills. Now everyone who I know knows what it's like to go through a pandemic. We are literally living through policy failings that I think we can no longer make a debate point. Longer acceptable for you to just answer a couple of questions about climate. And I think that's actually, I've been so policy big that has a lot of lodges. But you in your city or your state, you understand that they want to remove my job. I want to keep my job. How do we do this? These are the questions that we kind of need to answer, and I don't know, speaking to a base, if we can dog whistle all day, but when it finally gets to an issue that is coming to my front door, I think people are starting to see policy, and even having the bravery to point to systemic issues like racism. You don't fix racism with a bill, right? But I can pick my two or three. For me, it's healthcare. It's, I want to be able to purchase I don't know, whatever your issues would be. We have to get. I'm not going to tell people what they have to do, but would love for us
But
to
you
get back
want
to
to tell
the place where
people
we
what
are
to do.
thinking of these people as legislators. I want to, but what you also realize is that I think what I've realized in this last election, you don't need to tell people what it is that what they need to feel or who they need to vote for. People just have to become involved. I think that's the beautiful thing about democracy and this experiment, is that once you give yourself the agency, or once you're given the agency to be able to participate in our system, because the United States, Nate talked about DC, we have Guam, American Samoa, we have all of these representatives in our legislature who are not voting. Wow, it's 2020, and it's like, there's so many things, and I think there's so many things people are thinking about. Yeah, those are my comments.
So Ariana had to leave real quick because she's actually working with the Georgia Democratic Party to help get John Ossoff and Warnock elected. But Nate, what are your thoughts on this fast-tracked move by the Justice Department to have these executions take place? This intentional, rushed move to and make sure that this happens.
Well, full disclosure, I am staunchly against the death penalty, but I think it is worth mentioning that even the Supreme Court has noted that the death penalty doesn't actually serve as a deterrent from violent crimes. It's the main rationale that people see, hey, that person did something so bad, the government decided they needed to die and decide not to do something. But we know now that's not true, and that really has never been true. It's also important to know that in a country with serious disparities in law enforcement and justice like this country, that the death penalty isn't applied evenly, that most of the people that are executed in this country tend to be black and brown as opposed to their white counterparts, that there's disproportionate effect in people who are tried for capital punishment. The death penalty is a relic of the past, and it's time we really move forward and do something about it, because more of the same has never served them well, except for the people in power.
Yeah, but the people who like the death penalty say, look, that guy or lady is not going to kill anybody else because they're dead now. They will point you to the Bible and say the Bible says kill people who kill people. There are all kinds of reasons to justify it. I mean, what you've presented is an absolutely rational, logical reason why someone should oppose the death penalty. The problem is everybody's not where you are, and it's extremely emotional, it's extremely visceral, and I will tell you, having worked against the death penalty, trying to promote death penalty prohibition legislation, there are people who tell you, look, I am with you that it's unfair to black people. You know what the solution is? Kill all the white people who kill people too. It's not to get rid of the death penalty. You just kill more people, because that's what they believe. They think you're right, Mr. Cook. I hear you. We're killing black people at a disproportionate number. But I tell you what, we'll kill everybody who gets charged with homicide. And that will will that make you happy? Well, that doesn't make me happy because I'm not really about the death penalty. So they don't think of it, the way you do. They don't see the disparity between poor people and not so poor people, black people and white people, men, women, young people versus old people. They're happy to kill everybody.
If I can,
Go ahead.
I think that I agree, because I know that there are probably people like that, but I think it's more of a symptom of this American machine that has these timelines and dates, and people are on schedules that we don't even really know about. Why didn't the American public know about them being able to fast track executions? Why isn't there a bill against that? It's kind of like, I don't know. I feel like I want to give people the benefit of the doubt. I feel like it's more of a symptom of just being a part of this government that has its hand in many different things. I will say that I do find hope in the fact that the First Step Act was passed right before this pandemic. And so we see in the criminal justice system something that's always been there, home confinement. That is not a new practice, but it was placed almost perfectly at a time when we definitely have used it to alleviate and to avoid undue death within our prison system. There are just policy things like that where I see people doing the work. They didn't anticipate our current period, but with what's happening right now, you do have a lot of people being able to have early release and or home confinement. So there are just things like that kind of give me, I think, a little bit of hope to say that policy can still be the answer for some of these problems. And honestly, it is our only tool unless we're overthrowing people like, the French Revolution. But
well, that may be necessary. But I will say I'm a cynic, and I will tell you that many of those compassionate releases, which existed for years and years and years before the pandemic, and the early release programs, happened because those governmental officials wanted to avoid lawsuits. It's got nothing to do with care about the prisoners. It's got to do about protecting the public fisc and being accused of killing people in an environment where not everybody, but public health professionals were telling them, you have got a petri dish of death here, and you're going to kill a bunch of guards, a bunch of inmates, and when they die, they're going to sue you. And they said, oh, let's fix that. And so that's really what it's about. The Eric Holder and the Obama administration stopped death penalty. They said, we're not going to do that. The federal government has the authority to pursue the death penalty in certain criminal offenses, and they have the ability to accelerate or seek the actual imposition of the death penalty once it's imposed. And the Obama administration basically said no. Now, and the reason they did that was because they couldn't get legislation to end the death penalty at the federal level. So they exercised their policy prerogative and just didn't do it. Mr. Trump comes along, and he and Bill Barr, at the urging of a bunch of supporters, said, well, we can change that policy and we'll juice them up one more time. And that's where we are, unless the Congress passes a law that says there's no more federal death penalty. Is that going to happen? Probably not, as long as there are 50 or 45 Republicans in the Senate. It'll never happen because that doesn't work for their constituency, at least for much of it. Because I do believe I have had the fortune of traveling around the country, and you can talk to a lot of conservative Republicans who don't believe in the death penalty out of a religious reason, out of a logical reason, as Mr. Honore said. They just don't believe in it. But there's a lot of them that do, and so they kind of get drowned out by the noisy minority.
And to your point, Professor, when folks talk about, because I've heard people in barbershops complain, Obama didn't really do anything for the Black community, in terms of criminal justice, particularly. My thing is, look, I had the opportunity of speaking with an individual who worked in the Obama Justice Department, and they said all of the things that are in the First Step Act and more, because the First Step Act still has deficiencies. For instance, the act does not reform or reduce the number of years people are sentenced for. The back end policies, that so-called back end, the act solely focuses on the back end policies by allowing prisoners to accrue time credits, by allowing prisoners to exchange those credits for early release into a halfway house or home confinement. Also, the mandatory minimums, it doesn't do anything to reduce or eliminate mandatory minimums. But this person said we had concrete proposals that we wanted to have done in a bill. But remember, the Senate in 2014 swung to the Republicans. And that was when the Republicans had almost a trifecta. They had the House, they had the Senate, they had the Supreme Court. The only thing they didn't have was the executive branch. And that's when you start to see a lot of these executive orders. But back to the politics of this, it just makes me wonder, why is it that folks believe that the Obama administration didn't do much? Trump now has gotten with this First Step Act. And I think it comes down to what you were saying, Professor, with the marketing. And especially, I want to talk to this a little bit. Now that time is slipping away, Obama's comments on defunding the police. He had said, as a tactical measure, that argument actually does more to counteract what it is that this movement is aimed at doing, which is addressing police brutality and ensuring that concrete proposals, policy proposals, are put in place that mitigate these incidents. I know where Obama was coming from as a state legislator in Illinois. I was watching a documentary where he said to his advisors, his advisors, I know these country club Republicans. They're the same ones I had to deal with in Illinois. And so when he was approaching John Boehner and Mitch McConnell and the folks who were obstructing him, he was coming with this kind of compromising attitude with the hopes of getting something concrete done in the future, in the long run. And I've heard folks say, well, how can the president say this? He said that he personally could see Trayvon Martin as being his son in 2012. He cried for, the kids in New Jersey who were killed by a mass shooting incident. How can he now turn and say something like this? I want to get your thoughts, panelists, real quick, on whether you agree or disagree with what his comments were, which was that, that phrase, that slogan has done more harm than good.
Yeah, I definitely want to say something on that one. So my friends, the Democrats, and I say this with all love and sincerity and a big hug, are the worst marketed organization in the history of mankind. The Democrats have figured out ways to not properly say what they're trying to say and let someone else dictate their message. And they have done that to an extent that is otherworldly. For instance, I think what my friend Barack Obama was saying was that he agrees with the why, right? He just doesn't agree with the how it's coming across. I don't think anybody doesn't agree with the fact that we are spending too much money on cops pulling people over and not enough money on social workers going into homes to stop what's going on over there. I don't think anyone will disagree with the fact that we aren't putting as much money in elementary schools as we are in police departments. That's a problem, right? I don't think anybody disagrees with that. But it needs to be marketed the right way. I think Republicans have this thing with branding that they're just able to stay on message, even if it's hurting you. After a while, you start repeating it and saying, you know what? Maybe they do. Maybe there is some fraud in this election. Maybe my vote didn't count. Maybe, stuff like that. They're able to come across with that stuff. But when you're coming across with common sense things, for some reason, the Democrats aren't able to turn that into branding, into something that is a phrase that's going to help. And the Republicans were very much on message with defund the police during the election. Unfortunately, I agree with all of my friends in the civil rights and social activists, all of them. There are many out there, and some of them hopefully they're watching this. I support you, but that whole message was hijacked by the Republicans, and it was used as a hammer against the Democrats in 2020.
If I can add, I am trying to figure out a time, at least in the past, where Democrats are right on the issue, but Republicans obviously, kind of handicapped it and tried to, so for example, here with the defund the police. Let me start here. The role of the activist is different than the role of a politician, right? Their goal is to make sure that they can get their interests advanced, whether it's in just in the public discussion, allowing people to hear what they have to say, whether it's through a slogan, and then also have deeper conversations about what it'll mean to, reimagine or actually literally defund the police and redistribute money to other services that are desperately in need, right? I mean, for example, in many of our cities, we defund education all the time, right? Every time we see budget cuts that are slashed at the city and state level to support education in schools, that's defunding schools. But no one ever sees that as a problem because why? Who knows, right? I think also when people say that Republicans are good at, taking what we say and making it their own movement or making it their own message, it's basically because they also have just an advantage nationally in terms of numbers, right? They are a largely white populated party that allows for people to believe that what they say is more accurate or more right than the party that contains others, Black people, people of color. And so often our words, no matter, even if we said reimagine the police, they will find a way to, damage that or rebrand it in the way that they want to do it. Even though we said we wanted to, in 2010, Barack Obama said we wanted to give the Affordable Care Act to people in order to give more people the access to high quality health insurance. And they said that Obama was issuing panels and things that were just ridiculous, actually worse than what we heard about defunding the police. But the reason why people give them, I guess, the benefit of doubt is because America, this country, has been, largely, we're living still in a white supremacist space. And so what white people say, white party people who are, leading in that space, people seem to believe what they say more easily than what Black people say or what people of color espouse. And I think that's also just a structural problem. And it's a structural issue that we as Black people and people of color live in, right? So we can try to, rebrand, defund the police or, try to find the right word that'll be nice to others. But the opponent party, the opposition party will find a way to handicap what we say, and they have advantages in being believed because of those sort of white supremacy advantages that run rampant across America. So it's kind of hard for us to even try to workshop it or figure out another way to really frame this stuff.
Well,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Chris, I would just say, and for the people who were tearing down statues this summer, for the folks who were upset, for the folks who actually lost individuals, they don't care if defund the police sounds good to you, or if it makes for good talking points, or if it's for good for floor speeches, or if it raises you more money. That's literally how people feel. I don't know. I think we make it's like we don't get it yet. Like, we're still in a democracy looking for our kings. Barack Obama is not the king of the United States. We respect him. We know that he did a lot for us. I'm glad that we had him. Great president. But what he says is not, he can say what he wants to say. And because he's not our king or a despot, those comments add. It brings, I can also think a certain way about something, but it doesn't make or break the argument. And also the people who created that argument don't care how it sounds. I really like what Chris said, because I think we still, as Blacks at different levels, look for a certain amount of white approval when we say how we feel. And saying how you feel, for certain people, not for all of us, but for certain people, it doesn't matter how that sounds to you, to a politician or to someone with power. Again, it's moving more towards the issues. I think it's wonderful because it's forcing people to say, why would you say defund the police? I thought we loved them. No, some people don't love the police. Some people are not happy that they're getting more money than teachers, than social workers, than services. So I think it's great because it's a conversation that we need to be having.
Well, as the resident old person, I will say that when I was younger, and the slogan "Black Power" freaked people out. The difference is what Mr. Johnson said. There's a different role for activists than there is for the politician. Yes, that's right. And what caused, I think, the most significant angst was the articulation of defund the police by members of the political establishment, the elected officials at the federal level and at some in state level. And that's what caused, I think, the consternation. When Stokely Carmichael and others articulated Black Power as a watchword, when it was picked up to some degree by Malcolm as a watchword, Dr. King, SCLC, Urban League were not having any parts of that. Okay, they ran like hell from it. The elected people in the then Congressional Black Caucus, a very much smaller group than there is today, no parts of it. But part of it was tactical. It was to say to the political establishment in the United States, you can deal with me, Dr. King, or Adam Clayton Powell, or Charlie Diggs, or whoever was in the Congress at the time, or you can deal with those crazies out in the street. You pick one. And tactically, that worked. But when you have that radicalized, and I will say radicalized not in a pejorative sense, but radical in the sense that it's a significant departure from where you are, where the center happens to be at that whatever point in time it is, and you have that embraced by a significant part or prominent parts of the political establishment, you create a problem for yourself. Okay, and my only concern is not that defunding the police is a bad idea per se. I think that Egwu said it from a straight up and down marketing point of view. It's a very, very bad idea. That's got nothing to do with whether it was heartfelt, sincere, or even meritorious. It just didn't. It just collapsed. It was like a cement, words out there. So I think that part of what Barack Obama was reacting to, because he is a complete and thorough politician, he was coming at it from a politician's point of view. That is an elected official or somebody who wants to get elected, that just won't work, which is different than whether it's a bad idea. Because as you said, Ms. Moore, it is absolutely a conversation that needs to be had. And it is much more nuanced than simply defund the police, period, full stop. It's a much larger conversation. And it goes back to, Jesse Jackson, when he ran for president in 84 and 88. He said, what is it? How is it a good idea to lock all these people up in prison? It costs more to keep somebody locked up in prison a year than it does to educate them at a public university. So what are we doing as a society? How are we allocating resources? So it's a huge discussion. Why do police departments have to have tactical uniforms? Why do police departments have to have tactical vehicles? Why do they need heat rays? What is that? That's not what the police ought to be about. But we have, as a larger society, ceded over to police this militarized, this paramilitary kind of mentality that you can have whatever you want, because we're so afraid of crime, which is another way of saying we're so afraid of these black and brown people who are coming across the wall taking our stuff that we'll let you do anything as long as you promise to keep them away from us. And that's part of the problem. And civilians need to take control again of the police department and make the police department understand you work for us. We don't work for you.
Yeah. And I think that that's part of why, this conversation and what we were just discussing can be seen as activists on the defund the police side can see this as a success, because for the first time in a long time, people are actually just scrutinizing, city and municipal budgets for the first time and actually looking, oh my goodness, I didn't know that, mayors were negotiating contracts with, police unions at this level and allowing them to be able to have this much power to, do certain things without accountability. Oh, I didn't know that it costs this much in terms of salaries or for, like you were saying, technical and material uses towards police departments. And, now I can look at, I didn't know that the Department of Human Services and Health, the health department of a city was making this little. For the first time in a long time, people are now having these conversations. And I think that what we have to figure out is how we can kind of allow for it to build by, having people starting to attend city council meetings and really starting to hold their state and local leaders accountable to, the work that they're supposed to do. And, I think that that's what activists are supposed to do. It's supposed to raising the consciousness, raising awareness. And I think that we've seen that so far in 2020, and we have to allow for it to continue to build going forward.
Yeah, I'm a big supporter of activism. I think what we're talking about is a couple different things. One, and the good professor, Mr. Cook, talked about just the branding. Like I was saying, when politics are politics by soundbite, right? Activists are street politicians. In the street, they get the bullhorn, and Tamika Mallory, she doesn't just say defund the police and sit down. She explains it in a way that unless you are completely diametrically opposed to her, you get it. She sits there and she says it in a loud, beautiful voice of exactly why we need to defund the police. Politics is politics by sound bites. So the minute defund the police comes out of a politician's mouth, that's all that's going to be played, and that's all people are going to get to hear. So we have to message looking forward to that being the reality of the message that's going to come out of our mouths, that they're going to only take that one thing and distort the rest of it. So I'm never going to disagree with all of the things that we were saying. Like, I agree with everything about defund the police, except for the way the slogan is used in the political realm.
I'm right there with you on
I'm going to say this,
but I think it's also important to remember that Democrats won this election because of Black Lives Matter. So it's not right for the National Party to now to turn around and say, okay, even though you just handed us the White House, you're doing a bit too much, sit down and be quiet. The cry to defund the police started itself during, there have always been calls about police budgets and how it's not right that they get so much money. But really, this specific call came about early in the pandemic when cities were begging for money and saying, we're having these massive budget shortfalls, and activists started looking at the budget and saying, why is the county board of health and the city health department getting this money when the police are getting that money? And when we talk about in the political sense, when going back to the fallout after the election and seeing the Democratic Party lose a bunch of seats they won in 2018, knowing that it was activists that handed this election to the Democratic Party, to still have these party members say, this slogan is why we lost our seats. Was it really ever the slogan, or was it bad campaigning? Was it people saying defund the police and your Republican opponent saying my opponent supports defund the police, or was it you and your campaign never actually saying what you stand for? Then we look at, because there aren't the era of country club Republicans, back in the 70s when there were both Democrats and Republicans who could talk about civil rights and why there needed to be an equal rights amendment banning sex discrimination. That era is dead and gone. It's never coming back. And, we talk about messaging and campaigning. Look at Maine. Sarah Gideon ended the race with over $10 million in her campaign account in a race where people were spending her money nonstop. It wasn't the slogan, and I refuse to believe it was. And one example of that is the Midwest. We saw that Donald Trump campaigned heavy against the squad. He put a lot of time and effort into winning Michigan and Minnesota. He made it about Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, but Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib's presence on the ballot and their connection with their community is what kept Minnesota in the Democratic column, and it's what flipped Michigan back to Democrats. So Obama's comments are part of the discussion, but it's also important to remember the GOP knows exactly what defund means because they've been defunding education, talking about defunding Planned Parenthood for decades.
I want to go ahead.
This discussion on police reform, we can talk about reform all we want, but very little has actually happened on the case of reform. And when stuff has happened, it's come at the expense of schools, of hospitals. Obama's comments are important, and Obama is respected by the party, but I fear that his comments gave cover to party leadership like Schumer and Pelosi to just kind of do nothing again on police reform and kind of say, okay, wait to the midterms so we know what the party looks like afterwards, and then wait to the next election and then nothing happens. Because how much different would this discussion be right now if Obama had said, we might not like what they're saying, but we should hear these protesters out. We should hear these activists out because they deep down they want what's best for the nation.
But Ms. Moore is right. Barack Obama doesn't establish the agenda by fiat. That's if we allow him or Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer or Jim Clyburn to set the agenda, then we've defaulted. As I said in class, you always get the government you deserve, either because you work for it or because you sit on your ass and let it happen to you. So if we don't believe that defund the police is a bad thing, or if we don't believe that Barack Obama's comments ought to provide cover to Nancy Pelosi, we need to light Nancy Pelosi up, and she needs to be real clear that her political future is dependent upon responding to what a significant group of her constituents say is important. So I agree with you, that they're going to try to use Barack Obama's comments as cover, but I also think it's incumbent upon us not to let them get away with that.
So I want to put a plug in real quick. The Justice Department for the current administration, the Trump Justice Department, has a budget plan for fiscal year 2021 that they put in place a little earlier this year that requested $1.51 billion for over 50 programs funding state and local law enforcement. And this number is actually a decrease from previous years. And I think, in the ABC town hall that Joe Biden had, not the ABC, I'm sorry. Yeah, the ABC town hall. Biden actually said, it's not me that wants to defund the police. It's them that wants to defund the police. And I'm wondering, why is it that, to your point with the messaging, the Democrats down ballot should have been saying, it's not us that want to defund the police. Look at the record, look at the budget allocation numbers and then come back and see if we're really for defunding the police or if they're for defunding the police. Put them on the defense. And too often we play offense. We are always defending our positions, always explaining away and not putting them on the defense. And I'm grateful for the Lincoln Project because I said, well, thank God we actually have something to counterpunch with. And it's so ironic that the Lincoln Project is actually comprised of Republican men. But, I push back on what Nate was saying a little bit because I was saying, I think also with Obama's comments, it was actually portraying a nationalistic approach as opposed to a specific region or geographic area. I think when you look at Jamie Harrison, there was so much funding going into his campaign. Lindsey Graham was begging on Fox News for some donations. When you look at, states that just looked like it was in the bag for Democrats. Montana, for the most part of the election, looked like Bullock was going to take it and run away with it. Sarah Gideon, you pointed out. There were races where you kind of felt as if because there's a moderate there, they have a good shot. And I had a conversation with someone. The American public has seen more of a right-wing extremist approach to government, more than it's ever seen in modern history. A really far left government. Going back to Reagan, Reagan was initially seen as too right-wing. The Jimmy Carter campaign was celebrating when he won the primary in 1980, only to quickly realize that he was a force to be reckoned with politically. And so since then, the country has become accustomed to seeing what a far-right government will look like. And so when you put up an Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or Bernie Sanders or someone, a Cory Bush who says, look, it's my way or to heck with you, I do believe that would have a more of a devastating effect than it would for a really right-wing person to come out and start, going off of what their agenda items have. But being that the night is slipping away from us, I wanted to touch on this last topic real quick. Hunter Biden's investigation. The Justice Department Hunter Biden announced that the Justice Department has been investigating his taxes as it pertains to China. This has been an issue that's just blown up. I was sitting in a Firehouse Subs earlier this year before the pandemic shut everything down. And out of the blue came this man I don't know from Adam. And he starts talking to me about how Hunter Biden is such a corrupt person and the Biden family are so corrupt. And I'm really voting for Trump because I love my kids. And, he was just going down the list as to why it is that Biden is not what he seems to be. And, I always say if Trump came out tomorrow with a saying that Mars is purple, people would come out with T-shirts about how Mars is purple. It seems like reality is whatever.
They'd be Qs. They'd be Omegas that have gold things on them. Be purple and gold shirts.
But the thing is, like, reality is what the leader says it is, and this is the thing that's crazy to me. You know, if the leader says it's rigged, it's rigged. If the leader says there's something there, is there. But if the leader then says, "Hey, Hunter Biden is corrupt, but by the way, I'm going to issue pardons for my kids," that's not a problem. I want to get your thoughts on that.
Well, I guess as a CPA, I'll give a few things. Being investigated for taxes is a very American thing. Donald Trump basically says that he's been audited for the last 20, 30 years. What do you think an investigation is? So I'll wait for a conviction of some wrongdoing with Hunter Biden and taxes before I move on to what should happen or what shouldn't. I think one of the bigger points that you're going to see is that, you know, Hunter Biden is the black sheep of the Biden family. No one's going to argue that. You know, Bo was the good child, the beloved, the child of the golden child, and Hunter was the one that seemed to have more problems. But what Joe Biden was able to do to his political advantage was point out the fact that we all have these in our family. We all have someone with a drug problem. We all have somebody who makes mistakes, but we love them anyway, right? And I think he was able to turn that part in that debate, I think that was the second debate, into one of our key points where people looked at him as that empathetic guy. You know, even people who are on the edge, they looked at it like, you know what? My cousin has a drug problem too. My cousin has issues too. So let's wait to see how that turns out before we think, because it could turn out to be nothing. You know, investigations and taxes, you know, go right and left very fast.
Do you think if there is something, you think Biden should issue a pardon?
Well, would he have to? You know, there's a lot. What if there is something and he has to pay back taxes? He'll happily write a check and pay it away. If he goes to a country club jail, will he do it? Will Biden pardon his son? I don't know. It hasn't happened before where someone has been in that situation, but there's been a lot of people. I think Bill Clinton pardoned one of his brothers. I think that wouldn't be looked at as abusive, but I would hope that, you know, maybe, you know, given the fact that at the state level, it looks like Trump is going to be prosecuted, maybe on January 21st, at least the charges might be levied at that point, that, you know, he might take a look at that and say, you know what, for him to appear as an impartial person, that he's going to, you know, maybe lessen the time, maybe commute some of the sentence, but still let it stand. I don't know.
Any other thoughts? I mean, the thing to me is just the hypocrisy is just it's exhausting. You know, you have someone talking about preemptive pardons.
Right.
You know, and,
right.
and that's the thing. You can't issue a pardon for things that did not happen yet. At least from what I understand.
Or can you?
No. A preemptive pardon is a pardon that's issued before they are charged or tried or convicted. You can certainly issue a pardon for that. That goes back to 1866. You can issue a pardon to pardon someone for a crime they may have committed that they have not yet been charged, tried, or convicted of. What you can't issue a pardon for is for behavior that has yet to happen and say, I'm going to pardon you for the homicide you're going to commit in a year and a half. You can't do that.
And so the administration has said, you know, to the press, expect a flurry of pardons.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, the hypocrisy is extending even to the election, because if you believe that you legitimately won the election and that you have a shot of somehow overturning, 20 million votes, you know, how can you now justify all of these pardons? We talked about it earlier, the execution being fast-tracked. What is the rush if you believe that you're going to be in for another 4 years?
Well, because you guys are going to steal the election from me, and people who steal the election are then going to prosecute me and my children in some bogus prosecution. So I have to protect my family from you people.
Any other thoughts?
I think it's
I was
become
just going to
kind
say
of.
real quick. Oh, go ahead, Nick.
Sorry, you go ahead.
Um, it's not about him being guilty or not guilty of these charges. I think it's really more about they are just like us. You see both sides. Both of us are, um, going through similar things. I think it's, you sling dirt when you have dirt to throw. I think you also sling it when you're trying to distract. And this is another thing where I'm like, Trump is not a genius. This is not some sort of well thought out plan because they know he actually did something. It is to occupy your time and to keep folks entertained and to rally the base and to make sure that you have money in your political coffers. Because we live in the United States of America, there is going to be an investigation. I mean, those are the parts of democracy that still work. There's a whole department, they're going to go through the process, but it is really, to me, it's not about Hunter at all. It's not about, it's not about there being actual charges. I think it's just to show, from a very strange standpoint, the legal problems that Trump has gone through during his presidency. We're talking about an impeached president. So if that were me, if I were in a position where I had all of those things stacked against me, I'm gonna throw every single thing I can at the other side, just to show that they also have things going on, even if they don't.
Pick up enough dust in the air. Nate?
It's become very vogue that whatever Trump is accusing you of, it's what he's doing. Trump talked a bunch about China and how Joe Biden was soft on China and was going to get pushed around, and how Hunter Biden was doing stuff in China. And then it came out a few days later that Trump had a bunch of money stashed away in Chinese bank accounts. So like it's been noted before, tax investigations are nothing new. If Hunter Biden is smart, he'll keep his head down, turn over, whatever it is the IRS is asking for, and this is probably going to be nothing. But again, it's massive hypocrisy, because while Trump is talking about Hunter Biden's son, now he's working in jobs he's not qualified for. Trump's daughter is a White House senior advisor. His son-in-law is the White House senior advisor, and his other son is a campaign advisor. What do they know about anything? So it's really just I hate to kind of ascribe this kind of credit and say that there's 4D chess at hand, but this really is just kind of looking like something that Trump has the ability to use to deflect away from, the dirt in his backyard, and the fact and the very real possibility that he's looking at mountains of prosecution.
And I'm going to say, regardless of what this investigation finds, from what I'm seeing, it just seems like Hunter is more transparent. Just take partisanship out of it. He had an interview, if we remember, earlier this year with Martha Raddatz, I believe, on ABC News. Sat down, spilled everything. It seems as if there's nothing. It's not defensive. It's more so, if there is something, go ahead and find it. Whereas with Ivanka Trump, with her jewelry line, and then Jared Kushner, remember, he's coming from a family that, is also a business family. And then they've, the fact that the Trump brand has continued to make profits. There's reports of folks buying, seats at tables at Mar-a-Lago to get closer to the president, to get to talk to him about policy decisions. It doesn't get more clear cut than that. Could you imagine, Dwight Eisenhower going to what used to be known as Shangri-La, Camp David, issuing out tickets for folks to talk to him about the Korean War? That's just crazy. And so, I would say, as of right now, it seems lopsided in terms of which side is being transparent. Any other thoughts before we close out?
No.
Well, if not, I just want to thank this amazing panel. I had a wonderful time. Couldn't have asked for a better panel to start back up with. Ariana Patton, I understand how she had to leave early. Nate Honore, Egwin Nwangpa, Camille Moore, Chris Johnson, and Professor Cook. Thank you all so much for joining me for the 21st edition of the Political Mic. I'm excited to start back up now that I can breathe a little bit more for this December. But thank you all for being a part of this. I really enjoyed each of your thought-provoking perspectives. It was a robust conversation. I'm looking forward to having you on in the future, not too far away if you're open to it. And we're in some interesting times. I would encourage those who are watching, if you know someone in the state of Georgia, if you yourself are a resident of the state of Georgia, please go ahead and vote. I think early voting starts this Monday. If you've registered, please do so. As much as at stake, like we've discussed earlier, so much going on that we couldn't even talk about it in the extended period that we had. But I want to thank each of you for what you brought to the table. I had a great time. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and conclude this broadcast of the Political Mic.
All right,
Thank
go
you,
Oakwood.
Mike.